Welcome, adventurers. It's Thursday night at 8 p.m. And my great nephew is trying to get in the picture here. My great nephew, I guess I should say. He's my niece's. There he is. Okay, go ahead and sit down. All right. This is live and we're on the air, so I'm going to have to go back and do a few things. It is Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. on the West. Which I also is called the Pacific by Bill, not by the rest of us, but my time zone naming project protest continues. Once again, we are blessed to have our famous co-host back from Madagascar, where he hung out with the lemurs, social media celebrities, and of course, chameleons. The headmaster of the Chameleon Academy, Bill Strand. Who am I? I am your host, Sean McNeely. All right, now please welcome our guests, Charles Cook and Dan Johnson.
How y'all doing?
Good. Great. Thanks for coming on. All right. Our topic again today is Boas, genetics, breeding, and health. Bill, any announcements for this week?
No. For the chameleon community, we do have a podcast that's going to be launching tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so listen to that, and you can come to the live discussion. It's going to be all about hydration and should we give chameleons cups to drink out of. It's been a trend in certain corners of this internet, and so we're going to talk about it.
All right, sounds great. Awesome. So all right, other than that, Charles or Danny, have any announcements to give us? Charles, are you going to be at the show this week, this Sunday?
Yes, I will.
Area?
I will be at the Cleveland Reptile Show this Sunday. I'll be bringing out some amazing baby boas, guys to look at and possibly purchase. I will have.
I don't purchase them all first, but yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about it. Snakes in general, boas, we're talking particularly. We decided today we'd talk about genetics. So, Charles, you want to kick us off? And what do you know about genetics? What should we know about genetics?
So, I wanted to do this topic today. I guess we're going to talk about some of the popular.
Hello?
And boas.
Yeah, Sean, I think we are running into
and some ones that
the smartphone problem.
Probably not.
Yeah. Are you using a smartphone, Charles, instead of a computer? Hello? Everybody's frozen except Dan. Can you talk? Are you frozen? No,
I can talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
can you get in there and just bat for Charles there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, as far as genetics go, and my knowledge of genetics, whenever you breed reptiles, or really when you breed anything, mammals, there's a lot of people that breed dogs, cats for specific traits, physical or otherwise. You need to know a bit about how those traits are inherited. Generally speaking, and I'm just going to use, the common terms that people generally use in the hobby to describe these different genetic traits. You're working with three different types. You have recessive traits, which are inherited from parent to the baby, but it's required to show visually a recessive trait. You have to have two copies of the gene, basically. An animal can be het for a specific recessive trait, and that would they wouldn't show it visually, but you would know it. Either you purchase the animal from a breeder, that has integrity, or you bred the animal yourself. So recessive traits, the animal can carry the gene, it can carry the trait, and have it not be visual. but then when you breed it to another animal that carries the trait or is visual, it shows the trait visually, the babies will be the visual version of that trait. So, as far as recessives are probably the more complicated type of inheritance to understand, but then you have incomplete dominant traits, which basically pass a snake is visual for it, and they pass it along to the offspring, and those are visual offspring as well. So, and then the third type that we really deal with in the reptile community are the dominant traits, which they act and work just like incomplete dominant traits, in that they pass their visual. The snake either has it or it doesn't, and it passes to the offspring. But the big difference between incomplete dominant and dominant is that there's no super form when you're dealing with a dominant trait. So when I say super form, they can be visually different in incomplete dominant traits. They are visually different. It's how you can tell that they are in the super form. But as I said, the dominant traits don't have that. They just pass onto the offspring in the most simple way, I guess you could say.
So what are some of these traits? Albino, is that one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in most reptiles, you have albinos. You either have what they call T negative albinism, where it's the typical albino that you would see, that it would be white, yellow with red eyes. And then you also have in boas, as well as in ball pythons and a bunch of other species as well, you have T positive albinos, and they are not really sure where the term albino comes in there, because they don't look like the typical albino, but they are recessive traits. So albino is recessive, and the T positive traits are recessive as well. And they just add that really cool, the T positive traits add a really cool element where they still take out a lot of the melanin, just like a regular albino does, but it leaves a lot more color in. At least, like I said, with the boas and ball pythons, there are some other species that they act a little different. But
So besides albino, what other types of traits do you commonly see?
well, in boas we have hypomelanism is a really common one. Where you're with that, you're taking out all the black pigment, and what you have left is a lot of reds and browns and oranges. And then jungle is another very common one. It changes the pattern up, it cleans up everything. It gives the animal a much different look. And there are certain indicators for each of these genes as well to kind of identify, because in breeding boas, you'll have a litter, and that litter, is going to be so variable. You could have a hypo animal that looks completely different from another animal that has the same genetics, but they just look drastically different. And so identifying these traits can kind of be a little tougher, especially with something like jungle. So a lot of times, like how boas have the little head spear, that head spear will be broken, and then it'll start again on the dorsal, and that's a good indicator for jungle. So there's just a couple different things like that help breeders identify what they have in the litter after they have it. So
Charles, are you able to talk to us now? You back, or you were gone for a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, I'm back.
What other types of patterns or genetics do you see, or have you seen?
Well, we have a lot of me personally. I deal for a poly. It's a genetic that passes on color and color because it's polygenic, so it passes on color to other animals, and or purple morph, whatever you want to call it. And um, it started in Europe, I guess, really beginning to take a hold in America, that it's able to produce in animals, especially with when you we found that mixing the polygenic morph with a what I found from my breeding is if the eyes weren't red, you wouldn't even, and a lot of times when you are dealing with this gene.
Charles, you're fading in and out again. Dan, can you jump in and help? Or
Yeah, sure. So I work with the purple pastel trait as well, and that it's kind of tied to a form of albinism in boas called the Sharp strain albino. It was developed by Brian Sharp. And so the purple pastel, I'm not sure the origins of it are a little hazy, we'll say, but it came out of Europe. I imported animals. Charles imported animals almost a decade ago, that we've been working with this stuff. And so the idea with polygenic traits is, like what I touched on with recessive and incomplete dominant, the animals, you either know that they have it because they show it visually, or they inherited it from a visual parent, and there's no doubt, they either are that trait or they're not that trait. So with polygenic traits, it's like your selective breeding. So you're breeding for animals that look a certain way, but it's not necessarily an on-off switch for the offspring. So it's more of a gradient. So if you have 20 babies in a litter, you might have one that, the one down low, you might not see the purple pastel trait, but then, the number 20 on the gradient will really show that trait. So the idea would be that you breed, take the best purples that you have and you breed them together and you produce more and more purple in the litter, and you save the best and you breed those together. You breed. What we've actually done a lot is bring in other bloodlines, so you don't eventually go through like a breeding depression where, weird things start to happen when you're breeding too many siblings together, or, that type of thing. Try to stay away from that. But I've heard a lot of people, that's one of the controversial topics when you're talking pythons and boas. A lot of people will just for years and years and years and years breed whatever to whatever and not really have a conscience about bringing in new blood to keep that, keep the animals as healthy as possible. Because, it's really interesting. When we breed for these visual traits, we breed for, that type of thing, but we really don't breed, or, at least, I prefer to breed really healthy and robust animals. And that is inherited as well. The healthier the animal is, the healthier the offspring are going to be. And that's one thing that really should be focused on a lot more than it is, because we're trying to cram all these genes into these animals, and sometimes what comes with all of them, especially the different combinations, is you get some animals that are not quite as healthy and as robust as they should be to continue the project and continue breeding. So,
am I able to jump in and ask about that?
Sure, Bill. Absolutely.
Okay, so I've worked in the chameleon world, and I'm pretty much a chameleon guy. But so I've watched this go on in the snake breeding, to where we've had these snakes bred, and the genetics were, I guess, not robust enough, and so we had defects in the snake, but because they were bred for color. And yes, there was a backlash saying, "Hey, we're what we're doing has to change." And so the question is, what was the driving force that allowed that to happen in the industry, and what is now being done to pull the practices out from the ones that led to that?
That's well, I don't know that as much as should be being done is being done to hold that. Because a lot of this, and I'll never breed to race to be the world's first of a certain genetic combination or anything like that. I- I'm not one to spend $50,000 on the latest morph to bring it in and pump it up full of food and breed it as quick as possible. And there are it's those types of things happen all the time, and really, unfortunately, it's reinforced with money. And so, as long as that continues to happen, then we won't really put a stop to it, I guess.
But is there enough of a an awareness in the community that it's that robustness and physical health needs to be part of that that drives some of their spending? Because we know everybody in every community, every industry, we speak with our wallets. It doesn't matter what we say, it's what we pay for. And has that become important enough that people are willing to pay for health instead of color?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, if you're a breeder and you um, gain a reputation that your animals are healthy, and people have long-term success, they raise your animals, they breed your animals, and they produce the best offspring that they can produce from the pairing that they're doing. Um, you know, Once you gain that reputation, you're in. And so, in my opinion, it is the responsibility of people that do this to help people identify. Because I mean, you can go to a reptile show and you can pick out the sick ones. You can pick out the ones that aren't being fed enough, that have weird stuff going on,
Hydrated.
that are just not as healthy looking. So and it's tough to kind of ostracize people, but it is a big problem. There's there have been litters out there that were cutting edge stuff that everybody bought them up, and most of the animals in the litter died after the first year. And it's sad because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of heartache that goes into that. And you can't really pinpoint the cause. It may have been that the animal was bred too early, or like I was saying, that it's rushing to combine the genetics, and it just ends up being too many. And or something came along with it. Uh, uh, a lot of these genetics that we deal with, especially in boas, a lot of snakes don't, um, like ball pythons, don't have the massive range that boas do in the wild. So you could have boas, way down into South America, all the way up through Central America into Mexico, and a lot of times their physical attributes are different. So if a morph pops up in the wild in um, in Mexico, and those snakes tend to be smaller and from a more arid climate, and so that morph pops up, and now you start to breed it into your Colombian stock. What else is going to come with that morph? What else? There was a big thing with Central American boas. I can't remember what morph it was. This was a while ago, where they were. It may have just been the Central American T positive albino. That small rib cages were coming with these animals. So you were breeding the smaller Central American stuff into the larger Colombian stuff, and you were producing these larger animals that had these little tiny rib cages, and the females were never able to really produce. And if they did happen to become gravid, they would die, and it was a whole mess. And so a lot of that stuff is just not, it's not accounted for, because we're not geneticists, we're not you know doctors in any of the fields of study that go into this type of thing. But a lot of it's trial and error, and a lot of it, unfortunately, because there is the business side of it, people don't want to, euthanize and throw away projects because they're not viable.
How much of this is breeder driven and how much is it the general community? Because it sounds like some of these very expensive morphs and such would be purchased by breeders. At what point does the general public start putting money into the system? Because I imagine if it's just breeders, eventually, wouldn't it collapse? I mean, obviously it hasn't, but
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, right now, if you look on, for ball pythons, for instance, you go on Morph Market, there's 50,000 of them available or some ridiculous number.
Boas
That
not
is
so
really
much.
interesting. What's that, Charles?
Was not so much. I was actually on there last night just looking to see how many boas were available. It's really a slim picking.
Yeah. So I think I've thought about this quite a bit actually, because who buys a $2,000 boa or a $5,000 boa? You know what I mean? It's usually not the end user. It's not somebody
Just throwing up his hands.
That wants to display it in their house. You know what I mean? And just it's a pet. It happens occasionally. It does. Especially in things like the ball pythons. When the blue-eyed Lucies and those were really common, but they were expensive. People were buying them as kind of like, I have an all-white snake with blue eyes, and it's just very pretty, and they were willing to spend $1,000 or $1,500 for it. But it just doesn't happen, that often. So yeah, the whole breeding for genetics and breeding for morph thing is kind of like a very odd pyramid scheme almost, where it's like we're just selling to other breeders that are then working on the projects, and then they advance the project because they breed, or they take the project in a different direction, and then people gain interest in that, and then they buy those offspring and take the project in an even further direction, different direction, and it just keeps going on and on. But you're right. I don't think the general public buys into this too much. It's usually people that are looking to further their projects.
Yeah, but I asked this question because if this was new and everybody was excited, I'd say, okay, the bubble's going to burst. We've got a tulip situation here, but this has been going on for decades, and so it's obviously got staying power.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering, how is it's supporting itself and maintaining these? Obviously, it is.
Yeah, and it has been slow, right now because the economy is tight, and the breeders that would normally have that extra cash to invest, they're not making those investments right now. It is a What's that, Sean?
Yeah, Sean, I think you're muted.
No, I was talking to my nephew who was walking in the room. Sorry, I apologize. Gotcha. I also noted that the chat seems to be quiet today. There seems to be a problem with the people getting in on the chat, and I'm sorry that for those of you who are watching and aren't able to chat. I apologize for whatever we did wrong to, or what I did wrong to not allow people to chat. Unless you guys are seeing chat, I don't see anybody talking at all. Usually our chat is very busy, but anyways, pardon?
I see a lock on it.
Oh, there, I'm here just listening, Stephanie Payne. So, all right, so someone can. So actually you could do it. So I'm wrong. So that's I guess I need to mute because my dogs are barking in the background and it's not my feet. But nonetheless, all right. So anything more about genetics and the ethics of genetics, or do we need to go into health and what have you now, or
I can talk about genetics for as long as you want to, but maybe we should move on to the next topic.
All right, so let's talk about health. What are the common health problems of boas?
Respiratory infections are big among boas. A lot of times it's just due to boas need more space. They need that, and not having enough space, you will definitely and dampness definitely a recipe for respiratory infection.
So they need to be humid and hydrated, and they need to have the enough hydration, but dampness. How do you align the two different topics? Them not having too much humidity and being able to be moist at the same time. I know it's a big thing with chameleons trying to figure it out. We let it dry out and we fog them at night. But what happens with boas? What do you do for them?
Dish. Me, I use water dishes to keep my humidity closures. The water dish is really important. Really important when it comes to boas. These are some things that I have to really stay on top of. Me, my snake room is my basement, and it is really tough. In the wintertime, I have to put a humidifier, and the summertime I have to. And I have my room. I call it the meth lab. I have it wrapped. It's
Don't
wrapped.
be saying that online, and you're in Pittsburgh. Huh? You're gonna get raided. We're gonna see the people knock on your door, and you leave the program.
Our door, the snakes in the basement. But yeah, so breeding snakes in a basement is really it's really tough. I hope to one day have one of those fancy snake rooms like Dan has. Right now, I got like 450 snakes in the basement, and it's really tough. Yeah.
So Dan, what are you doing? What are you up to? You just using a water bowl, or you have something different going on?
Yeah, actually, my room, it's also in a basement room, but it's all finished, and my temperature stays. I run two thermostats, one in each end of the room. It's about I have about 500 square feet, and it keeps it 82 degrees, and rarely does the humidity drop below 40%. So usually I'm right in the 55 sweet spot, where I don't have too many problems with shedding or anything like that. It does get with air circulation when you're dealing with a room like that. It gets a little weird because I have like 5 or 6 fans that point in different directions and try to circulate the air properly. And sometimes you'll get in like different corners. You'll get moisture accumulation just because it's driving all the moisture into that area, and so you got to adjust. And I've been in this spot for about 2 years now, and just now I've got it nice and dialed in. But yeah, the humidity, the ambient is really what you want to drive with boas. I mean, they'll benefit from being 70-80%, and in their cages it is a little bit higher just from having a big water bowl in there. But what Charles was talking about with the you don't want to have substrate that's just damp. It can grow mold, it can cause all kinds of things. You don't want an animal laying in moisture. You want to have that ambient moisture supporting them.
Yeah, it's strange because we're really chameleon people. Bill and I, he's more than I, but in chameleons, they dry shed. So the sheds, they need to be drier to shed. Where snakes, they need water and a water bowl to shed. And Bill's actually going to be talking about water bowls and chameleons this weekend, so or at least soon. So the opposite is probably very true. But nonetheless, it's just different reptiles and different situations. So,
Yeah.
what other diseases do they have, Charles?
Mites. This is one of the reasons why we don't like to do a lot of reptile shows. Pick up mites, and they are a disaster to try to get rid of. And especially in boas, because they like boa scales, and they get underneath of the scales of a boa, and they're really hard. They're really hard to get rid of. And to get rid of them once you get them. And reptile show, are like to them up. I know some people who you can't ever get into. Is Dan Johnson's one of those. You can't ever get into his room. You're not. You almost have to put on a hazmat suit.
Yeah, you got to take a shower beforehand.
It's funny because Bill and I were talking a few weeks back about reptile shows, and we were talking about parasites and everything else. And we were talking. I was going to go to a reptile show that weekend, the next weekend, and I decided that I wasn't going to go because I didn't want to put a full hazmat equipment on to get into the show, and I didn't want to have to, take a hazmat type bath after I got out of there. So I decided not to go, and that was actually the same show that we go to, Charles. Not that show is bad, but just all shows all together. It was data that showed that the shows are not they're not good, and so since people don't
be careful. I make everybody that comes to my table, I make them hand sanitize before and after, because I mean I just think you should. And I'm still just especially about other breeders coming to my table. There's a lot of things that can happen at a reptile show, and so when you come back home, you do your collection. You have to really go through a whole other phase of quarantine, going through that whole process, because you don't want to just bring something back into you can't get rid of, and so it's.
What does quarantine for snakes sound like or look like? We know what chameleons and some of the other reptiles need to quarantine. What does a snake quarantine look like?
A quarantine for me is a snake going into a totally separate room, never going back into the same room that it really came out of, until sometimes a month, sometimes weeks. It all depends on how the animal and how I think that animal's doing in quarantine. I like to get at the shed quarantine. That really helps for me.
Does shed have anything to do with mite status, or do you see mites better when they shed, or what's the difference?
Well, I like them when they shed because then I can about mites. Yes, I can get a better idea about mites. Most of the time when they shed, most of the mites will be in the shed, and if they have mites, I can.
Okay. So Dan, what is your? I mean, I understand maybe from Charles just speaking that you don't go to many shows, or that you're probably not at them. But when you get a new boa, what is your quarantine pattern?
So, like Charles said, separate room. I prefer 90 days. And depending, so what I'll do too, what helps a lot with, because a lot of boas have darker scales, like he was saying, and especially if it's a larger animal, mites is really the big problem. So the mites will get under the scales, they'll get under the scales in the neck, and you won't see them. You put them in your collection, and then you have an outbreak, and then you're treating 200 animals, and there's not a whole lot of mite treatments out there that don't involve some kind of chemical, and it's just hard on them. And I've actually had it. I worked at an exotic shop about 10 or 12 years ago, and I brought them home with me, and I fought them across state lines. They followed me everywhere I went for years.
State lines, huh?
Yeah, it was the battle of my life trying to get rid of these things. And what they ended up, the mites will actually, if you treat them, they'll just become resistant to your particular treatment. So if you're using a product like Prevenamite or like the flea and tick stuff that certain people use, they'll just become resistant, and then it just doesn't work anymore. So it's a really tricky thing. I utilized the thing that finally kicked it for me, where I used a product called Reptile Spray, which is really it's not as harsh as a lot of the other chemicals that are for pests, and then I use a lot of diatomaceous earth. And so the idea is you spread the diatomaceous earth all over the enclosure. I spread it all over the floor. I mean, anywhere a mite could crawl, I flung this stuff everywhere. And so the idea is that the mites will feed on the snake and then they'll go somewhere to lay their eggs and they'll crawl through the diatomaceous earth and die. And so, like I said, I was finally able to kick it. And now, like Charles said, I'm terrified of going to shows because I just don't want to bring something back. And, the mites themselves are awful, no doubt. But the bigger issue is what they can bring with them. So they feed on the snakes. They feed on blood, and blood can carry all the nasty stuff. So they can actually transmit diseases into your collection by spreading, by biting a snake and spreading diseases that way. And there's a lot of diseases that would come in from, like at reptile shows, you get these guys that still bring in wild caught stuff, and who knows what's coming in with it. And you might get something like a nidovirus or something like that would just wipe out your whole collection within a couple of weeks. So it's really scary stuff, and I don't mean to scare anybody, but it's just something that the good quarantine stops it right there. Well, obviously if a snake, you bring a snake home and it passes away, you want to take it to a vet, you want to get a necropsy, try to figure out what happened, so that you can let the person know even that sold it to you, hey, you got some bad news going on. You might want to, separate any animals, that you took to that show. You might want to, keep them away from the rest of your collection or, whatever. But yeah, mites can be really, really nasty for spreading stuff around. Like I said, let alone just being pests themselves, for sure.
Wow. Okay. So, what other diseases are there of boas that are common, or is those just the mites and the?
Actually,
go ahead,
can I jump in? When you say a 90-day quarantine, I'm wondering what kind of things would you expect to see after 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days? What kind of things would you see? Do you need 90 days for?
So like Charles said, shedding is a really good indication of health. So if a snake is in a constant shed cycle, they shed their skin and they go right back into shed. They shed their skin and they go right back into it. That's an indication that there's something wrong. The snake is trying to repair something
Right.
that is not right. So that type of thing will happen, almost immediately. At 30 days, I mean, boas are very slow metabolism wise. I won't feed something for 30 days. I'll let it sit and let it acclimate and let it chill and let it get used to its environment, let it hydrate, and all the while I'm watching to make sure that everything is good. Are there any external parasites? If it defecates, everything look good there. Is there any internal parasites? That type of thing. I generally won't involve a vet unless I see something that indicates to me that there's some trouble somewhere. A lot of people will just take a fecal sample to a vet just to make sure there's nothing. You don't really have to worry about that so much with captive bred animals as you do with things, that are wild caught. But after 30 days, feed it, and then just keep going. All the while, you're just kind of watching, just making sure that nothing looks out of the ordinary. Does it keep the food down? Regurgitation is a huge sign that something is majorly wrong. Any type of blowing bubbles, snot, excess mucus, stuff like that can all be signs that there's something weird going on.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Bill?
That does.
All right. So, was there a third problem that's, I mean, I know you talked about diseases brought in by all these mites. Is there a third major problem or third category, or is that the big two?
Well, okay, so I do want to talk about, there's something very strange that is in boas. There's a virus that goes around. It's called arenavirus, and it infects boas, it infects pythons, so mostly things that are in the boa family, but it's a very strange thing because boa, like, if you test a big collection of boas, chances are you're going to find it, and they're asymptomatic. So your it passes through contact fluids, stuff like that. So it's not an airborne issue, but they get it really easily, and most animals carry it, and you never have an issue. They're just asymptomatic the whole time. But what tends to happen is when you ship an animal, or if an animal's husbandry is not quite right and there's stress on the animal, then this arenavirus will progress to what they call IBD, stands for inclusion body disease, and it's a death sentence. And so now that there are tests that people can do, and I recommend it, you actually swab the mouth of the animal, you send it away, and they test, and you get a good feel for whether that animal has arenavirus or not. So they actually don't have a test for when it goes into the IBD form. Except actually looking at the brain of the animal and seeing the inclusion bodies in that, actually seeing it. So it's usually that's done for a necropsy, but the swabs do help if you have an animal that starts to get respiratory infections, like we were saying, during quarantine. If you have an animal that gets a respiratory infection, you treat it with antibiotics, and it gets better, and then the respiratory infection comes back, that can be an indicator that something's going on with that. A lot of times with arenavirus 2, once it becomes IBD, you start to see a lot of neurological issues in the animal, and so it's a very nasty thing. But it's also a thing that most people probably have in their collection. So that's what I started to say. It's a strange thing, but it's one of those things that's very manageable if you do have it. But it's also it's one of those. It's a catch-22 in the boa world. So it's a tough one, but it is good to spread awareness of it, and to let people know that there are testing facilities. I think the University of Florida and I can't remember the other one, that does testing for it, and the tests are fairly inexpensive, $30 or $40, and then you buy the little test kit and then swab the animal and send it off, and you get a pretty conclusive. Like the tests are pretty good now. It used to be you could get false positives and all that stuff, but it seems to be pretty good. So just wanted to make you guys aware of that. It's a kind of a weird disease that floats around in the boa community.
Wow. Charles, any other thoughts about today's show that you wanted to tell people? Reach out, health and genetics and what have you in quarantine.
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a great topic, something that needed to be talked about, especially with the different way that things can be transferred around. I think a lot of times we look at one thing, and we might look at, say, like the mite, for instance, and we only look at it as being a mite, but not what the danger, how really dangerous that mite can really be. It can carry different things from different snake to snake. It can transfer things around, and so I thought that was very, very good, and it could really be very helpful to someone. Some ways to Dan gave up some things that he does, or that he did, that he had to do in the past to get rid of them. Uh, I also use the what's that powder name, Dan?
The diatomaceous earth. Yeah.
Yeah, the diatomaceous earth. I also use that, and I try to use the mite spray too. But sometimes, if I had an animal and it was really bad, um, I would have to use something a little harsher, and I hate to use the harsh chemical because it's really bad on the animal. But frontline works for me. Um, I know it's a dog spray, but it actually works on snakes too. And you can't even find it anymore. They don't even sell it on. They don't even have it on Amazon anymore.
Really?
The frontline spray. So yeah. So
Okay.
I was just giving that information up just in case somebody who was listening may have had some problems with some mites.
Okay. Dan, any last thoughts on this topic or these topics?
I think I'm good. We covered a lot of stuff. I think we're.
So, Bill, any last questions that you have?
No, I really enjoyed the answers to the questions I had. That was things I've been wondering about. I'm good. This is great.
So I thank all of you and our audience for being here, and we'll see you next week. I still haven't locked down the topic, but it should be something very interesting. Probably something from the show I go to this week. Maybe I'll meet up with somebody else and get somebody else to come on. I think this has been my theme for the year is someone I met at a show and how we got to know each other and talk about the different things we like. And the goal here is to get it so that you don't have to buy all these things. Although I think next show I'm going to buy a snake and I'm going to buy some of those bugs that we talked about last week, isopods. But so maybe that'll be Charles will see me coming. He'll know I'm out to purchase. So maybe he'll do me a favor, or maybe he'll double the price. I don't know. It depends. All right. Thanks everybody. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
I'll see you at the show this weekend.